Jeremiah, that famous prophet, is dealing with many years of difficulty for Judah. Judah was in turmoil with Egypt and Babylon fighting over control. Babylon wins in 605 BCE. Then Judah was taxed heavily and interfered with often. So Judah decides to revolt. They revolt once, twice, and 3 times, losing each time with greater and greater consequences for the people. The 3rd time, in 586 BCE, Babylon destroys Jerusalem. So there you have about 20 years of heartache followed by decimation. This lasts for 50 years, during which then Jeremiah offers hope once Jerusalem is destroyed. It was Cyrus, king of Persia, who saves the day and allows the Hebrews to worship as they see fit and begin to rebuild the temple. This past summer, when we were gathered and making lunch, eating lunch together, making posters, seeing candles, making plants, we were at the California Zoroastrian Center, Los Angeles. They mentioned time and again Cyrus, an esteemed leader of Persia, and one important political figure which our Protestant Reformed faith and the Zoroastrians both hold dear. In the 8th chapter in Jeremiah, we hear in first person Jeremiah's deep sadness and personal loss. "My joy is gone," he laments. His joy has dissipated due to the cries of the poor people all over the land of Judah. Why did they have to mess up so badly? Why did they not follow the Torah and love Yahweh? We are doomed. We are doomed, and I am hurt and in mourning. Where is that balm in Gilead? There was a balm or a salve which was produced in Gilead east of the Jordan River. This is an area known for spices and for ointments. It was expensive but useful. When at loose ends, even today one might say, is there no balm in Gilead? Where is the hope for healing? Poor Jeremiah, who at this point knows that trouble is all around, after the destruction of the temple, he begins to prophesy about hope. Hope is what Rabbi Eric will be preaching about for Rosh Hashanah next Saturday and Sunday. Hope, he says, has to be followed by action. That is mandated. When we were in Trona, California over Labor Day, during dinner I sat down by a family. They described the 7.1 earthquake. They were sitting in the kitchen, and then all of a sudden, a loud train noise startled them. All of their kitchen items from all of their cupboards came rushing down all around them, crashing and breaking. They described it like a fountain of water flowing rapidly down all around the ground. When we hear of Jeremiah wishing that his head was a spring of water and his eyes a fountain of tears, so that he could cry and cry for his people, think of that image of crashing plates and cups, forks and knives. Most of you here have experienced severe earthquakes, so you have had your own downpour of possessions and lived through that situation. The people of Trona just lifted their shoulders and said, well, it was just things. It doesn't really matter as long as no one died. When we were at Ridgecrest, their richer neighbor, 22 miles to the southeast, we did not hear the same thing. We heard sadness and more sadness of trauma being experienced. They had a harder time dealing with it than with the people in Trona. Psalm 79 concerns nations that have not followed the Torah, and destruction has arrived with the fall of the temple in Jerusalem by the Babylonian army in 586 BCE. When I was in seminary, that was the most important date to know. So everybody, that's why I keep saying it, 586 BCE, the fall of the temple. You got to remember that. God is angry, furious. The writer asking a common question from the Psalms and as well as from their lives. How long, O Lord? How long will you be angry with us? Forever? Will this never end? Think of a time in your life when you asked just this question in your prayers. How long, O Lord, how long? The writer is very descriptive, so we can't ignore the visual images, the images of the birds in the air. In the book Raven Black, author Anne Cleves writes about the Shetland Islands off the northeast coast of Scotland. There were ravens on his land, always had been, since he was a wee boy, and he'd watch them. Sometimes it was as if they were playing. You could see them in the sky, wheeling and turning like children chasing each other in a game. Then they'd fold up their wings and fall out of the sky. Magnus could feel how exciting that must be, the wind rushing past, the speed of the dive. Then they'd fly out of the fall, and their calls sounded like laughter. But other times, ravens were the cruelest birds. He had seen them attacking a new sickly lamb, with the ewe not being able to protect her offspring. This is the image that we see in the psalm, that of birds flying luxuriously in the air and then dropping down and eating their fill. There is no denying that God gets angry and demands action from the people of the book, from us. The psalmist begs God to deliver us and forgive our sins. We want to, I believe, hear these words instead. For God's anger is just for a moment, but the Lord's favor is for a lifetime. Or, Yahweh is merciful, gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast or abiding love. Yet we have sinned, and all of us can consider how we have not protected those who are vulnerable, like the sickly new lamb, the lamb that doesn't have a chance as the birds fall out of the air, wheeling and diving. Divine compassion is needed, desired to come in quickly to change our lives, like a balm from a part of the world where spices and ointments are at the ready to heal our errors and our wounds. Like the psalmist, we want God to remember selectively the good things we have done, not the sins of past generations. What would the Japanese who were corralled and placed in Mandernach state to this desire on our part? What would our member Owen Cato think, who was born there and named for that lake? What would First Nations say about our desire to only remember the good and forget the sins from past generations? How about people about whom generalizations are made due to their skin color, gender, or sexual preference? The psalmist states that the groans of prisoners, families pulled apart at borders, comes before God, as well as before ourselves. There is always time like now to reflect and repent. Then we, your people, the flock of your pastor, will give thanks to you, God, forever, from generation to generation. We will recount your praise. Luke 16, 1 through 13, follows the parables of the lost being found, the woman and the lost coin, the shepherd leaving the 99 sheep of the fold to find the one little vulnerable lamb to protect it from the raven. The prodigal son who has blown his inheritance, left the property of his father and his brother, and squandered all, returns and is found with joy mainly resonating. This next story that I will read could also be seen as the lost being found, the parable of the dishonest manager. This puzzling parable can't be found in other gospels. Following the parable that we'll read together, there are some sayings of Jesus. We have the writer of Luke to thank for this challenge. Jesus is speaking to his disciples, yes, but the Pharisees, as the writer of Luke writes, those known as lovers of money, hear this parable and sayings and did not like it once again. So if you'd like to open, I challenge you to open it up and read Luke 16, verses 1 through 13. Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said, 'What is this I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm too ashamed to beg. I've decided what to do so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, 'How much do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat. He said to him, 'Take your bill, make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of the light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into their eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much. Whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one, love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." Words of wisdom, words of grace. Thanks be to God. There is an owner of property, perhaps living far flung from his property, his acreage. Therefore, he needs a manager to handle the day-to-day affairs of the work, to watch that others are paying and using that property as developed. The reader is not told what this manager did. Something was an unscrupulous act. Whistleblowers alerted the rich man to problems that were happening surrounding his acreage. The manager's devious acts are found out by the owner. He is asked to give an account of himself and his behavior. We too in this day and age may ask for an accounting of money, actions, and demand explanations. The manager needs to figure out what to do to save his job, and he does. He arranges salvific action by changing the amounts owed by those in debt to the rich man. He takes off his commission from each account, which he would have been entitled to, and erases the previous greed that he demanded. Commendation occurs. Why? Because he figured it out. He acted in a clever way to be able to continue in his chosen career. We can learn concepts even from a shyster. Perhaps a fraud was going on, but of the most ingenious kind. The manager is a rascal, but a darn clever one who's lived to see another day. He does not deny that he acted poorly. He does not defend himself. He problem solves. He becomes prudent. The wisdom sayings of Jesus perhaps are added for the early Christians to try to get their heads around the parable of the dishonest manager. The children of the ages, perhaps we would call them humanists, or the children of the light, we would call them Christians, are mentioned. The saying is that the children of the light, the Christians, have lots to learn from the practices of others in this world. We are told to use prudently the wealth that we have, the wealth that could lead to dishonesty, to ensure a future with God in eternity. Material possessions are what you have that does not really belong to you. We know of the Woolsey fire, the campfire that burned possessions, leaving people most times with what is truly theirs. Their bodies, perhaps somewhat changed, but their bodies, if not dead. Their family, their relationships, their faith in God who walks beside them through the fire, the floods, the quakes. The latter is real wealth, that which cannot be taken from us while we are alive. Be faithful in all things, whether they are large and small. Handle all things with care. The little matters as much as the large. I had a conversation with a member last week who stated that even tiny little acts of respect on the freeway, in the conference rooms, or at home matters incredibly. Do not negate those tiny acts of compassion and care. We usually, in our jobs, do not have two supervisors. Imagine if we did. Imagine the confusion and the conflict that could result from your job with different people giving you varying jobs or ways to handle projects. Would not that lead to headaches, poor performance, and triangulation? And finally, at the end of the passage, we hear, you cannot serve God and wealth at the same time. Think of areas in our world which are devastated. Now, when I read about the destruction of Jerusalem, the taking away of the people, the carnage from armies, nature, and those who would dominate, I think of the little burg of Trona. This week, I spoke to the mechanical engineer who arranged for a structural engineer and architects to visit the ghost town. They wrote reports and sent them last week. When I asked him about further action, Jack Irwin told me this. When I was planning the trip to Trona, I was excited because in Newhall Presbyterian Church, there are many people who love to build and repair homes and make the world a better place. I believed that we would find a place for further planning and repair. However, he stated, it is impossible. The homes are in such disrepair that there is nothing to salvage. The skeletal remains of houses all over the town, even with requests from their leaders to demolish them, remain, and the requests are ignored. Imagine a little town with nothing to do in it except for the harvesting of minerals from a dry lake bed. Imagine teens, latency-aged youth, roving around the town on their bikes over the dust and dirt, going in and out of those homes without doors and windows, checking into everything, and due to the lack of care for that population that still resides there, falling into risky situations. That is what the town of Jerusalem might have been like. Devastation and destruction. Jeremiah cried a lake full of tears because he saw this coming and couldn't change the hearts of the people, even with the word of God placed in his heart and spoken out loud to those who would hear. Once the worst occurred, he became the prophet of hope. We are the children of light and need to be smart. There are smart people who do not leave their brains at the door when they step into our sanctuary. Our pastor nominating committee is using technology to accomplish their visionary work. They are working in the cloud together, creating an executive summary form to lead a potential pastor to our doors which lead outside into the world. They are working together in a clever way. Please continue to pray for them as they do this time-consuming relational job. God is calling someone to this location, and they are acting smart and efficiently to get this call in place. Consider what you would put your trust in. That which gives us security is something very different than money. The dishonest manager was lost and was found using all his capacity in the process. That is joy, the finding in ourselves of that which is lost to come out into the light and remain. Be a good steward of your wealth. Know that what matters in much matters in little. Every decision regarding that which gives you security is important. As we hear news of the impact of greed on this fragile planet, we also read of millions demonstrating all around the planet to demand care for the earth and every creature, no matter how large or how small. We know that children lead us. That is why we do intergenerational ministry, because we are led by the small. we also remember our baptismal vows to share our faith as children grow. This faith, which can be puzzling and complex, like in this parable. We use everything we have to try to create heaven on earth. Every nation matters, not just the large, rich ones. The Gospel of Luke offers challenge and promise. As we continue a close reading of it, we can become empowered and educated. There are questions that arise, and like Jesus and his sayings, sometimes there are no clear answers. If it opens us to rethinking our contemporary context, we are strengthened to be different. To be children of the light means that we work, move, give, care in a different way from children of the ages or children of the world. How are you different? How can you share what you believe with the world? Sometimes a ghost town, sometimes a child asking for a new way to understand life. You are always in the position to not just cry, but to act and give hope to this beautiful world, all ours. There are many instances of balm offerings in Encino. You know how to work in small or large ways to heal wounds. When Jeremiah asks, "Is there a balm in Gilead?" we can answer yes. There is a balm in Encino, and this congregation works to provide a soothing moment in time to people in need. Amen.